Hello everyone, it is me, Saigi77. Today I'm bringing you a ranking video, which I haven't done in a while. So, recently I just completed a playthrough of Miitopia, and let me tell you this, it was one of the best games I've ever played. One of the good things about it was the bosses. The bosses were all unique and creative and memorable in some way or another, and that got me thinking, I should probably rank them. I tried looking it up, any rankings of them, of the bosses in this game, only to find that barely anyone has ranked them, and people who have ranked them have only ranked them on difficulty, instead of like how fun they are. So I'm going to be the first one to do an actual ranking of all the boss fights in the game. So yeah, before we get started, please make sure to subscribe, and let's see how this works. So the way I'm doing this is I'll be ranking them on how fun and creative they are, as well as how well they fit in the environment that you fight them in. Basically, I'm just trying to see which one fits in the most from where you fight them. Just to let you guys know, I am not including any boss fights within the Galapagos Isles or New Lumos, as well as any randomly spawned dungeons. I'm only including the main 43 boss fights that can be fought within the game. And that being said, let's get started. And in 43rd place is the obligatory first boss fight, the mini slime. This thing is so gosh darn easy to take out, which makes sense. It is the first fight in the game. But even then, it only has 7 HP and only does 7 attack damage. Not to mention, most jobs can one-hit it quite easily. So yeah, obviously, it gets last place. In 42nd place, we have the Rocky boss. This is one of the first real bosses you'll fight in the game. And I'm just gonna say this, I really don't enjoy this fight. So, it'll only have a basic attack of just rolling right into you. And this can hit multiple of your teammates. And seeing as you fight it so early in the game, this can absolutely devastate your team. Not to mention the two cutenesses that it has on its side, which allows it to heal whenever it wants to. And yeah, this fight can get pretty annoying. Not to mention, it's just a rock. It's just a giant rock. That's not fun to fight. No one wants to look at a random rock. So yeah, it gets really low. The only thing stopping it from being in last place is the fact that the mini me slime exists. But it kind of has to exist for the purpose of being in a tutorial. So you know how I said that all the boss fights in the game were quite memorable? I kind of lied, because the Yeti exists. The Yeti is a fight that you go through in order to explore the Powder Peaks. And to be honest, I highly doubt anyone knows of this thing's existence. Hell, some people don't even count it as a boss. It is a basic punching attack, as well as a stronger version of that attack, as well as it should have a shockwave of ice that can freeze any of your teammates. The thing is, this thing is just a reskin of the general boss fight that you fight earlier in the game, and to be honest, that one is much more memorable because it actually has a purpose. This thing is here only so you can explore the Powdered Peaks. And while there are 2 other fights like this, at least they have like better gimmicks and actually creative instead of just being dumb reskins. So yeah, this thing gets to go down here. Next up, we have the Tomato Bros. And if I'm being completely honest, this fight is just pitiful. It's basically 3 tomatoes stacked on top of each other, and they act similar to the rock enemies, so where they can hit multiple opponents at once. Although, by this point, you should be able to not have to be worried about that. So why did they place this low? It's mainly because of their other move, the tomato juice move. So, there's a 50% chance that your Miis will hate the tomato juice and take massive damage. That doesn't sound bad, right? Here's the thing. It also has a 50% chance of healing you. That's right. A boss. Where the boss can heal you. That's just pathetic. Not to mention, this thing doesn't have much health, meaning it should be pretty easy to deal with. So yeah, it goes to go down here. If it wasn't for that one move, it probably would have gotten up higher. Next up is the Mii Cobra, and to be honest, You know how I said that the other boss fight was pitiful? This one is also pitiful, although for a different reason. It has, like the other one, it's a basic attack. It's only one person. Here's the thing. That attack is super weak. Not to mention its health pool isn't that much. So what puts it above the other fights? Well, it has the ability to summon enemies. It's the basic blue cobra. And to be honest, the enemies put up more of a challenge here than the actual boss fight does. With the weird how do you pronounce that? It actually makes this boss fight last longer than 2 seconds. But yeah, if it wasn't for the enemies, this boss wouldn't be up so high. Oh, would you look at that? Another lazy reskin that can be killed in a couple seconds. Yeah, the Pharaoh II isn't that hard of a boss fight. And not to mention, it is probably one of the most laziest reskins ever. They just made the thing blue and gave it the second at the end. Although, unlike the Yeti boss fight, this fight can be enjoyable. As well as hitting multiple people, it can also turn your Miis into pharaohs, which allows them to heal the boss. Well, I did complain how that is annoying with the Rocky boss. Unlike that one, you can actually find a way to stop it, and that's by putting your Miis in the safe spot. The safe spot really comes into clutch in this game, and to be honest, I feel like this fight could have been better if there was more effort into it. But yeah, it gets to stay here. Next up, we go from one of the last boss fights in the game to one of the first boss fights in the game. The first fight against the butterfly is pretty basic. It can attack twice, and by this point you have 2 team members. Why is it put high against all these other boss fights? Because similar to the mini Mii slime, it serves its purpose as being an early game boss. And unlike the other ones, I feel like it's actually fun and memorable. Like, it's one of the first fights you actually fight against. Not to mention, like the mini Mii slime, it has the benefit of being a tutorial fight of how to fight with multiple team members against a boss fight. But because it's so easy, I have to restrict it. But don't worry, we're going to be seeing this guy pretty soon. Oh boy, the Woofo the Wisp. I have a lot of personal hatred for this one. Not only is the boss fight really tanky and has a lot of damage, it can also heal itself, which is annoying. So, if I hate this fight, why is it put up here? For as much as I hate it, I gotta admit, it's a pretty decent fight. Not to mention, it is probably one of the most creative fights here. You're fighting a snot bubble that's controlling a dog. That's pretty cool. But yeah, just because I respect it, doesn't mean I have to like it. Meaning, it gets to find its way down here. The demon is another pretty forgettable fight, but unlike the Yeti, it at least has more to it. And along with having 2 naughty imps joining it, which, if you don't know, you were counted as a boss fight early in the game. Don't worry, we'll be getting to that one later. But also, it has the fear status. Also known as one of the most terrifying statuses on here. Pun actually intended. What it does, it pretty much just freezes your Mii in fear, making sure they can't attack. And while there's other ones that do that, none of them are as dangerous as this one. Seeing as most of the enemies that have this usually get another chance to attack, and those attacks are pretty powerful. If I'm saying all this positive stuff about it, why is it down here? Again, like I said before, it's again one of the more forgettable fights. Not to mention, its large health pool can be annoying to deal with. But if you know how to use a safe spot wisely and have a lot of HP sprinkles and bananas on your side, as well as a healer on your team, this should be a pretty okay boss fight to deal with. To be honest, I kind of feel bad for the Magma Mii slime. Out of the 3 slime fights in the game, this one's probably one of the more forgettable ones. And that's saying something, seeing as most of the slime fights are pretty forgettable. But this one has the problem of it being stupid easy to defeat. Yes, that's mainly because at this point, it's only you and the Great Sage. But to be honest, it's similar to the mini Mii slime, where it has the disadvantage of being put against all these other good boss fights. Although I do gotta admit, its large damage pool Not to mention its design are pretty cool, so I gotta put it up here just for respect. But yeah, it didn't really have a good chance to begin with. Oh boy, the Minotaur, or as I like to call it, the Cow's Revenge. This thing really does pack a punch. Not only with that giant hammer of its, but also because of this attack in particular. Yeah, that attack will most definitely wipe out half your team if you're not careful. And to be honest, it kind of does deserve to be here, mainly because it serves its purpose. At this point, you're trying to get to the genie, and this is the thing protecting its gate. And if you're gonna protect a genie, you gotta be pretty powerful. But then again, for being the first boss you go against in Next Door, it didn't really have to be this strong. Especially since a lot of the other fights in Next Door are pathetically easy, like the Cobra. But yeah, it's more of a situation where I gotta give it respect for being as strong as it is. It just doesn't really fit in. Oh hey look, it's the butterfly again, and this time with a fresh new coat of paint. To be honest, I really enjoyed this fight. As difficult as it can be, it kind of deserves to be like that. I feel like the second fight against the butterfly does a lot better than its first incarnation. It has a larger health pool and damage pool, not to mention a new attack. The only reason it's not put up any higher is because it's still pretty basic compared to other boss fights ahead of it. But still, props for being a better fight than before, Butterfly. Next up, we have the Owl. This freak of nature really can make you wonder if your team's strong enough or not. With its large attack damage, not to mention the fact that it can lower your teammate's defense, makes it a pretty tough foe to go up against. And to be honest, I kind of respect it. I would have probably put it up higher if it wasn't for the fact the fourth teammate appears so late within the game at this point that they're going to instantly die, leaving you with only 3 capable teammates to deal with this thing. And this thing is pretty strong. Not to mention, like I said before, it can lower teammates' defense. If this isn't really the boss fight's fault, it's more of the game's fault. But the boss fight takes place in the game where this event happens, so it really falls victim to the game's stupidity. If it wasn't for this, it probably could have gone a lot higher, because it has a pretty good strategy against it. But yeah, blame the game, not the boss, or me. Next up, we have the first painting you go against the game. Yeah, to be honest, these fights were weird. The paintings are kind of like misfits. They act similar to the hieroglyphs, and where they just turn around to hit you, but it can also dig itself into the ground to send a shockwave of rocks. And to be honest, out of the 2 painting fights, this is the more boring of the 2. Like, it uses a less obscure painting that I don't even know the name of, but I'm pretty sure his name is Red Fuji or something. And to be honest, the place you find is kind of obscure. Like, if you're not really checking the map, you're not gonna know it's in the underground labyrinth or maze, whatever you call it. But yeah, if it had a better spot, and if it had like a more unique attack than just doing the same thing the Minotaur did, it could probably go up higher. But its absurdity puts it up like this high. What I'm trying to say. The UFO shouldn't be this high. It's not that interesting of a boss fight. All this is hit you and steal your HP bananas. Which, if you have any healers on your team, this shouldn't be that much of a detriment. So why is it put up this high? Mainly because of its story relevance. You see, the UFO holds the face of the only person that knows of where the Darker Lord has gone. And because of it kind of has to be up this high due to its story importance. Not to mention its design's pretty cool. But yeah, if it wasn't for its story relevance, this fight would be a lot lower. Because it is really not that interesting of a fight. You know how I said there were 2 painting boss fights in the game? There's technically 3. Cause the study of me, or study of Dark Lord, if you really prefer how you want to call it. The reason I didn't group of the other painting is because it's more unique than the other two. Instead of being like a painting that already exists, it's a unique painting of the Dark Lord, which is pretty cool. Besides that, it's pretty much acts like the paintings. It does a regular spin attack, not to mention its elemental attack, which it chose to go the other painting style of rock, except this time instead of having rocks come off the ground, it just throws rocks at you. But there's also another thing that's caused its unique placement. The fact that you can't control what goes on in this fight. There are several fights where you can't control what your teammates are doing. Well, yes, that's mainly what the game's purpose is, not being able to control your teammates. This one's different, because you're not there. It's only your teammates. Making this fight completely out of your hand. You just gotta hope that you train them hard enough to survive at this point. And to be honest, that's the reason it goes here. I like the idea of this, that you're just watching you're just pretty much hoping that you're trained your teammates well enough to fight against this thing. It's kind of like a Pokemon battle, but instead of actually being part of the battle, you're a spectator. So not like a Pokemon battle. I'll just move on. Okay, you guys may be wondering, Saigi77, why did you put the mouse of all bosses in the 27th spot? Mainly because this fight is pretty unique. Yes, it can hit multiple enemies like the Rocky did, but to be honest, aesthetic-wise, it's much more pleasing to fight. Not to mention, it doesn't have an absurd amount of health and defense like the Rocky fight did. Also, it has Smile Shrooms on its team. But if you don't know, Smile Shrooms can affect you with the laughing effect, which causes your teammate to not be able to attack similar to most of the effects. But to be honest, they're much less annoying to deal with than the cumulus enemies that can heal others. Not to mention, it takes advantage of the safe spot, which within the area you fight the mouse, the safe spot can be pretty important since this is the area where you learn it. So yeah, I really think it serves as a nice boss fight. Just not the best. Yes, the pick that will most certainly get me put on several watch lists. The Naughty Imp is kind of a weird choice to have a boss fight. Like, many people don't really... the game tries its best to make it seem like a boss fight, but at the same time, not really. The music doesn't fit... It doesn't use the boss music, and later in the game, you fight these things as regular enemies. But, to be honest, there's enough factors going for it to count it as a boss fight. And to be honest, as a boss fight, it's pretty good. Its regular attack is pretty good. Not to mention the fact that it can turn your teammates evil, which is actually really cool. Unfortunately, I don't really have any footage of that happening, but you're just gonna have to go with me here. Not to mention, its design is pretty cool, and the place where you fight it is also cool. It's just a lot of cool things about it. The only thing stopping it is the fact that it has a weird relation of being a boss fight, and not. Next up, we have the slime that isn't so miniature. The regular slime fight within the realm of the Fae is a decent fight. It's probably the most meta fight here, to be honest. It looks cool, the aesthetic is cool. It's just okay. It can attack multiple enemies, and to be honest, the only reason it's put higher against all the other fights is because it serves its purpose well as being a regular fight. I really don't have much else to say on it. Oh god, the Darkest Lord's right hand. There's so many things stopping me from putting this fight right at the very bottom, trust me. But, okay, so the reason I hate it, similar to the robot fight that you do earlier in the game, it can lock onto your Miis, and in doing so, it'll be able to do this flaming pillar attack. So, how do you counteract this? With the shield sprinkles of Curse. That's how you're usually able to counter it. Here's the thing. This guy loves targeting the people with the shields. Like, a lot. Like, instead of just using the attack, he'll spend as much time trying to make you lose your shields as possible. And that's just annoying. But, I gotta admit, it's a pretty nice fight. Its use of magic is pretty good, and I really like its appearance. Yes, it's just a hand of a wand, but it's a cool hand with a cooler wand. Not to mention the music at this part is pretty good. So yeah, as much as I want to put it down lower, I gotta admit, it's a good fight. A lot can be said for the Cerberus as well. It's similar to the right hand, I wanted to put this a lot lower. Excuse me. But, again, just stopping it from getting down low. Okay, first, the hate. This thing has some of the most annoying attacks in the game. Not to mention, it's pretty tanky. But at the same time, it's a pretty good fight. It's probably one of the most unique looking fights in the game. Not to mention, you unlock the Hyper Sprinkles here. And if you see my playthrough, you know I love using Hyper Sprinkles. So yeah, as much as I want to put it down, it's a good fight. It's an even better fight than the right hand, actually. I just wish I would have at least lowered its defense a bit. Or better yet, nerf the fireball attack. Jesus Christ, that attack is so annoying. Pain Cloud. Pain Cloud. This thing's name is Pain Cloud. Why wouldn't you love it? But in all seriousness, this fight is actually pretty good. Nice damage. The lightning attack's pretty nice. It has a cool design. It's just mid. And I know we are reaching like the higher end of the listing, but to be honest, this is a pretty mid fight. Although thankfully, this is one of the last mid fights in this game. I think from here on out, we got some pretty good fights here, and my negativities of the fights are gonna be a little bit lower. The Strong Golem and the Gold General are probably some of the least offensive fights in the game. In this game, they really much balance out each other. The Gold General will absolutely destroy you with its attacks. It has a regular punch, charge-up punch, and the shockwave, similar to the Yeti. Although, unlike the Yeti, which absolutely can be decimated because of its low health, same can be said for this one. I mean, yes, it can be killed pretty easily. But then you gotta remember that the Strong Golem is here. As well as packing a punch of its own, this thing is pretty tanky. Not to mention, it will act as a human shield for the General, which is actually pretty nice. The dynamic between these two is pretty cool, but unfortunately, there's another offense-defense duo that do the job a bit better. But we're gonna have to talk about something else before we can get to them. Huh, what do you like of that? Another golem. That definitely isn't a sign. Okay, so the Burning Golem is actually a pretty fun fight. As well as being pretty tanky, it also has a pretty good attack where it pretty much is able to attack all teammates. And while that seemed bad, to be honest, it's actually pretty fun, because even though its damage is pretty high, it's still pretty much dealable with. I can't talk today, okay? But not to mention, it got a pretty cool design, and not to mention, you also still have the Great Sage with you, so it really shouldn't be that hard to deal with. So yeah, it gets to go up here. Let's go see what the next fight is. I swear to God, guys, this is not a coincidence. I really do feel about this. So the regular Golem, it's one of the first threatening fights in the game. The Rocky fight, you could say that's threatening. No, that's the first fight in the game that shows you how much bullcrap this game can put you through. This is the first actually challenging fight. Challenging and fair, I should say. It's pretty tanky, it plays a pretty good defense and a pretty good offense as well. Meaning you're gonna have to really focus on your teammates' health and damage output. And not to mention, it's the first fight to use the second boss theme. And while I think that is my least favorite of the three main boss themes, it's still pretty good. The music in this game is just good. But back to the boss fight, I think it serves a really good purpose as being one of the more major fights in the game. Like, you're not saving some random townsperson's face. This is the King of Greenhorn's face. And it's got a pretty strong monster attached to it. Never would I think to see that the day would come where I'd say not only a hamburger makes a pretty difficult boss fight, but also a pretty fun boss fight as well. The hamburger that is fought in Peculiar is a pretty cool fight, if I had to say. Its regular attack is pretty okay, but the fact that it can eat your teammates for a little bit is pretty funny, and it's also pretty cool as well. Not to mention, it has some bread on its team, while not threatening can definitely make dealing with this thing a bit harder. But you have another chef on your team, so if you don't have any healers for you, you'll still be okay, seeing as the chef acts as a kind of healer. Not to mention, it just looks good. The hamburger looks good in both like a design way and a way that you want to eat it. Like, am I the only one who wants to actually eat the hamburger boss? Like, yes, it's currently jumping on the ground and eating a human being, but you gotta admit, it looks delicious. Yes, the harbinger of one of the most beloved jokes in this game. I am Pharaoh is never not gonna be funny. But as for the actual Pharaoh boss fight itself, it's pretty good. It's a nice attack. We've already talked about the Pharaoh status. And the place you fight it, it's just cool. It's the top of a pyramid. Why wouldn't you like that? To be honest, I already listed some of the things about Pharaoh in the Pharaoh 2 entry. But I find this one to be like a lot more creative, because this is the first time you've really seen the Pharaoh enemies in the game. The Pharaoh enemies are probably one of the least loved enemies in this game, but to be honest, the boss fight itself is actually pretty cool. Not to mention, the fight itself looks nice. It's a giant floating head that it just fits so well in Next Door, which is the desert area. And as much as I hate Next Door, I gotta admit, though, it had some of the funnier fights in the game. Not counting the Cobra. We already know what I feel about the Cobra. Won't do any arachnophobes here, but the Arachno-Me is a pretty cool fight, all things saying. Not to mention, it's also probably the creepiest fight in the game. I'm just gonna say this here. I don't have arachnophobia, but just because I don't have it doesn't mean I can't admit that this thing looks terrifying. And the fight itself is actually pretty good. Amongst the basis attack, it also has an attack where it can summon spiders to damage teammates, as well as stop them from attacking it. That's a pretty cool effect. Not to mention, it has some snail buddies, which while those can be taken out easily, they don't actually like hinder the fight in any way. They're just there. So yeah, I think the Arachno is pretty cool. Yes, the General. This is probably got to be one of the most iconic fights in the game, simply because it is probably one of the most challenging fights within the early game. Its regular attacks and charge-up attacks are pretty decent, but that shockwave can absolutely destroy you if you're not paying attention. Not to mention, while weird, its design's pretty good. Not to mention its story relevance. You're trying to save the princess. Like, come on, it's Nintendo, of course they're making you save a princess. Everything about this fight, and Greenhorn in general, is just so cool. And I wish I could say more about it, but I've kind of already talked about how it works within the Gold General fight. The Gold General and Strong Golem fight. It's a pretty strong boss, not that good of a defense though. But yeah, if you ask me, this serves its purpose well as being the first major boss fight in the game. The Griffin is probably one of the coolest fights to first encounter. This really just shows how creative the game can be. By this point, all boss fights that you've faced have had the face of someone, but the Griffin is the first boss fight you go against that doesn't have the face of someone you know. It's just an enemy, a pretty powerful enemy at that, and it is a pretty good fight. It's not to mention the foreshadowing to this is pretty good. This is one of the only few boss fights in this game that have a bit of foreshadowing. With the prince's tirade going on about the monster that defeated his men, and it makes you wonder what could it really be. And yeah, this does really look like it defeated an army. Not to mention, it attacked 3 times, make your teammates cry, as well as put them in some sort of fear. It is a pretty hard fight, but I think it's actually a really cool fight, and like I said before, I love how they alluded to it before. So yeah, it gets to go out here. The frog fight is surprisingly a pretty good fight. For as annoying as it is, it's pretty good. To get this out of the way, the design, yes, I know, the design is kind of weird and actually kind of disturbing. But that doesn't stop it from being a good fight. As well as also, this fight's probably the one that fits in the most with the arena you fight it in. Its jump causes a shockwave of water to attack that hits you, and because it fits in since you're fighting this thing on a giant lily pad. Also, its bad breath, as annoying as it serves as a pretty good attack. It just goes to show that this thing isn't going to be a pushover, and you got to be really careful with it. Which makes sense, seeing it is as the major boss of the Realm of the Fae. For as terrible as the design is, I really enjoy this fight, and I think this is actually one of the last fights where I have a major problem with it. The armor fight is a pretty good fight. Not to mention, it's relevant in the story, is pretty good. This is the thing with your last teammate's face. Meaning you really want to beat this thing, seeing as this teammate is also the first teammate you made on your journey. And to be honest, I think this is a pretty good fight. As well as its like regular attack where it hits you, it can also summon sword and shield enemies to help it in battle. And to be honest, that's actually pretty cool. Which makes sense, its damage output isn't the biggest. Also, that design is just cool. A fiery spirit possessing armor, that is, you gotta admit, that's pretty cool. But yeah, that's as much as I can say for it. It's a good fight and it serves its purpose well. Barely missing the top 10 is the Robo. This thing is so cool to fight against. First of all, the arena. It is one of the coolest arenas in the game, and you can't tell me otherwise. I can only think of like 2 other arenas that beat this one out. Not to mention, its attacks are pretty cool. It actually has 2 phases to it. Its first phase where it locks onto targets, and this is actually the first fight where you get the shield sprinkles unlocked. Well, yes, they are kind of a weird item that come late into the game. I think they're pretty cool. Not to mention, it's a free hit. Also, its design, it's just good. But anyways, its laser attack, it's pretty good. And unlike the Darkest Lord's right hand, it won't go out of its way to destroy all your shields. It'll actually use the attack immediately afterwards, where it goes into its second phase, where it starts charging. This phase is arguably more harder to deal with than most of the other boss fights in this game. As well as having a pretty good defense and health, it also does a pretty good amount of damage. And I just really like this fight. It is unfortunate that it couldn't make it into the top 10, because I really wanted to put it there. But there are just other fights that are better than this. And that being said, let us enter the top 10, shall we? Next, we have the Sword and Shield. We have the Shield and Blade Me. I could make a Sword and Shield Pokemon reference, but I'm gonna be the bigger person here. Anyways, this fight is pretty cool. It's a lot of cool factors to it. As well as being the first fight where you fight more than one bosses, it also has the whole offense-defense setup with going for it. With the shield obviously having more defense and the blade having more offensive qualities. Also, the dynamic between these two are cool. Similar to the gold general and strong golem, they also have the father-daughter thing, but I feel like they do it much better here. With the blade helping the attack you with the shield, due to the shield not being that strong, and the shield blocking any attacks that towards the blade. It's just really cool. Not to mention, they just look cooler, and they're also more unique fights than the Gold General and Strong Golem. So yeah, these two get the start off our top 10. Now, number 9. If my placement of the mouse wasn't going to put me on a watch list, my placement of the imp definitely is. How could I put such an easy early game boss fight this high? Simply because it is just the coolest early game boss fight in the game. So, let's see. We got this really cool blue looking imp creature with apple jellies. 4 of them to be exact. And as you know, the more apple jellies there are, the stronger, the more annoying they are to deal with. But anyways, this fight just serves as a really good purpose. By this point, the Dark Lord has already told you that he's heading towards the castle. and to stop you from following him, he's had one of his servants come out to fight you. And when I say servant, these imps are really close to the Dark Lord, as we're going to be seeing later. But let's talk about the fight itself. It has a pretty good damage output with its regular attack and its weird portal attack. And to be honest, it's the first cooler boss fight, mainly because it has 2 attacks. Other boss fights have usually had only 1 attack. But this one, no, it has 2. And I really do think it deserves being number 9 on the list. In 8th place, we have the Darkest Lord's left hand. Why did I put the one much higher than the other one? Simply because I just feel like this fight does better as the final fight before reaching to the final boss. It has multiple cool attacks, like flip with the coin things on its arm bracelet. Not to mention, it doesn't do anything to straight up annoy you. It's just a giant hand with some coins, and it's just 3 people going against it. And to be honest, I just really like this concept, and I really just like the design as well. The hand looks so cool, and the coins are amazing. But yeah, this one gets the honor of being 8th place, simply because of how cool it is, and simply because it does the job better than the right hand. Yes, one of the main reasons this fight's up this high is mainly because of the joke factor. What are you gonna do, sue me? It's the Mona Lisa. Why wouldn't you like it? But in all seriousness, the fight itself is also pretty good. Yes, it's the basic attack, but it also has a fire-breathing attack. The Mona Lisa being able to breathe fire on your entire team to hurt you. That's just cool. Like, how can you not like that concept? But obviously, having it be a joke fight, I have to limit it on how high I can go. But just because I have to limit it doesn't mean I can't put it in within the top 10. Before I start off, let me just say, the Phantom of Evil has the coolest boss name in the game. Like, you can't tell me otherwise. Now, being just a repeat of the Dark Lord fight, it has its downsides. Like, it's not as cool as the Dark Lord. But even then, this fight is pretty cool. Its design is nice. Its attacks are definitely challenging enough to warrant it being here. And while it does lose one of its cooler attacks from the Dark Lord, I still think it deserves to be here. And also, it gets to go right before the top 5. Starting off the top 5, we have the Red Frog and the Meeples. This fight is probably one of the most challenging fights in the game. As well as the Red Frogs using attacks from the regular frog, you also have the Meeples to deal with. Yes, they're not as strong as the Red Frog, but that doesn't mean you can just straight up ignore them. These things will get in your way if you don't pay attention to them. Thankfully, there's a lot of countermeasures to this fight that stops them from being so annoying. 1, the ex-Dark Lord, in this case, for some reason mostly target the Meeples in this case. Meaning as long as you have at least one other team member focusing on them, they should be okay. Not to mention, I already like the frog fight to begin with. So adding more bosses to it just to make it more challenging really, put it up higher for me. And I really like it. And I like that this is the final fight you go against before heading towards the Darker Lord, because it really symbolizes how far you've gotten in this game. But yeah, this fight gets the honor of starting off our top 5. Let's go check what number 4 is. Don't get any ideas in your head. I know what some of you are thinking. Hear me out. This fight is the most unique fight in the game. I know I probably said that already, but I'm telling you. The Ice Queen is so cool. First of all, the name is cool. The design is cool. The area where you fight it is so beautiful. I love it so much. Not to mention, its attacks are pretty cool. Its regular ice spike attack can really, it's the basic attack. It also brings back the dipping heart of evil attack, which I really like. That's a really cool status effect. Not to mention, its ice breath attack can be challenging to deal with as well, because it can also freeze your Miis. Rarely. Or probably not. I'm pretty sure it can freeze your Miis. I may be wrong, Please tell me in the comments if I am wrong. But there's so many unique factors to this fight. Not to mention that it is one of the first fights. Not one of the first fights. It is one of it is one of the first fights to be featured in a unique area. What do I mean by that? You see, you fight this fight in a cave. Well, most of the other fights you go against will usually just be reskins of other areas. This one has a really cool and unique area you go against them. And when I mean fights, I mean the fights with the gem, where you go get the gems. Out of all the fights where you're trying to get the gems to unlock the skyscraper, this one is the coolest. I mean that metaphorically and literally. So yeah, all these factors contribute it to being this high. Next up is the RPG's obligatory dragon fight, right here in third place. This fight is really cool. Like, it's a dragon. What else is it gonna be? It can affect the fear status as well as breathe fire. And while that is pretty much its only attacks, you gotta admit, this is pretty cool. Not to mention, it's definitely a tough fight. It's probably one of the hardest fights in the game. This one really tests your, like how well you are. And it's pretty cool, because this feels like the final test before fighting the fake final boss of the game. So yeah, not to mention, it's a dragon. Dragons are automatically going to be cool. So yeah, this is third place. The next two spots you may notice are going to belong to the Dark Lord and the Darkest Lord. The two kind of final bosses of the game. I say kinda because the Dark Lord isn't really a final boss. Who gets the honor of being first and the dishonor of being second? Well, yeah, I think we all kind of knew who was going to be first and second. Before we go to first place, let's talk about the Dark Lord. He serves as a great fake-out final boss. The atmosphere, the music, everything about him is so cool. Especially his design. That design is amazing. Let's talk about his attacks. He'll slam his hand onto you, he'll throw boulders at you, and he'll put you into the Nightmare effect. The difference between Nightmare and Fear is that Nightmare can get knocked out of, which may seem like a disadvantage, but if I'm correct, Nightmare deals more damage, so it makes sense. So yeah, that seems pretty basic. But then comes his second phase. Well, where he'll steal your teammates' faces and summon the boss imps all the way back from Greenhorn. Yeah, now you know what I meant by these imps are his biggest, allies. Because the fact that he's able to summon the boss imps from all the way back in Greenhorn and put your friends' faces onto them, that's just so cool. Everything about this is really cool and really does serve well as a fake-out final boss. But as for the real final boss, yeah, we all know the final boss is going to be here. The Darkest Lord. Oh god, this guy. There's so many good things about him. First of all, I want to start off. The music. His second phase music, it's kind of bad. If you ask me, it's probably one of the worst songs in the game. But the first phase theme, it is so good. It really encapsulates that this is the true final boss of the game. Not to mention, it has leitmotifs from both the Dark Lord's theme and the Great Sage's theme, really showing that this is the Great Sage you're fighting. This is the Great Sage you're trying to save. But not only him, but you're also trying to save the entire world from this guy. But let's go to the actual boss fight itself. He mainly does something similar to his left hand, where he'll shoot multiple coins at you, but then he'll also summon coins with your friends' faces, similar to how the Dark Lord summons imps with their faces. These guys are actually more difficult than the imps, because they have a pretty good amount of health and can do a lot of damage. Then there's his second phase. He immediately starts it off by lowering all your teammates down to 1 HP before killing off one of your teammates. Meaning, if you don't have life sprinkles, you better hope that your cleric can revive them. Not to mention, it's really cool. You can tell that he is just desperate to try to end you off once and for all. all these factors lead to the Darkest Lord being the best boss in the game. I really do hope you enjoyed this ranking. I really enjoy playing this game, and I can't wait to play the next game, as well as finish off the other two series as of now that I'm doing. So yeah, this is Saigi37 logging out.